Hello everyone, welcome to Group 3 podcast. So we're here to dive into big ideas, have some fun, and maybe see the little world. Maaf ya, ulang salah. Hello everyone, welcome to Group 3 podcast. We're here to dive into big ideas, have some fun, and maybe see the world a little differently by the end of it. I'm Dewi, and today we are discussing something super interesting, travel writing. Now, before you start thinking about those perfect Instagram travel pics or 10 best beaches blogs, hold up, we're taking it way deeper than that. Travel writing has a long history, like way back to the days when explorers were out there discovering new places. But here's the twist. Their stories weren't just innocent adventures. Those writings helped shape how people and entire cultures were seen, and not always in a good way. A lot of it laid the groundwork for colonialism, painting places and people as exotic and primitive or in need of saving. Fast forward to today, and travel writing has changed a lot. Writers are more reflective and try to tell stories in a thoughtful and fair way. But let's be real, there's still work to do. How do writers share their experience without falling into old traps like stereotypes or making it all about the Western perspective? And how we can use travel writing to lift up voices instead of drowning them out? Okay, lucky for me, I've got amazing group mates to help figure it all out. We have Jingga, Rasyad, Aryca, and Suci. We're going to explore it all, starting with the colonial roots of travel writing, and then we're going to move into post-colonial orders and rewriting the rules. And finally, when it means to write about travel in a way that's ethical and responsible today. So whether you're a traveler, someone who loves reading about far-off places, or just someone curious about how story can shape how we see the world, this one's for you. So, Jingga, can you give us a quick history lesson on how travel writing began and its connection to colonialism?
Alright, let's start with a quick history then, okay? So, imagine we are at the 15th century, and European explorers are setting off to discover the rest of the world. But here's the thing. What they were doing wasn't just exploring. They were also laying in the groundwork for empire building. And guess what? Their travel writings were a big part of that. Travel writing at that time wasn't about, hey guys, I saw this place. No, it was more like, look at how strange and exotic these lands are. Early writers such as Marco Polo.
A brief introduction to Marco Polo was a Venetian merchant and traveler best known for his extensive journeys through Asia. This account significantly influenced European understanding of Asia during the late Middle Ages. Polo's writings describe the wealth, culture, and grandeur of places. Like the Mongol Empire under Kublai Khan, often mixing factual observation with fantastical elements.
For instance, describe faraway place as a mystery, which, of course, help justify imperial conquest. These explorers weren't just document landscape, but they were farming the world in a way that made European colonialism seems like a novel mission for them. And then the fast forward to the 18th and to the 19th centuries, this is the time the colonial narrative really takes off. Think of the writers like Lady Mary Wortley Montagu.
A brief introduction to Lady Mary Wortley Montagu was a prominent English writer and poet, known for her vibrant personality and groundbreaking works, especially her Turkish embassy letters. She is known for her sharp wit and unique perspective as one of the few women of her era to travel often and write about her experiences.
Who wrote about Ottoman Empire, She was fascinated with the exotic East. But guess what? Of course, there is still a clear lens of Western superiority, where the East portrayed as a blank canvas for the Westerners to the influence. Now, Arshad, as a post-colonial critic, what accomplished this history tell us about the way indigenous people were represented in these early travel writings?
What a great question. But let me define the indigenous voice first. Uh, Indigenous perspective in travel writing frequently emphasize themes like cultural resilience, identity, and the effects of colonialism. By highlighting their viewpoints, indigenous authors seek to challenge stereotypes and offer a deeper understanding of their communities. This transformation enhances the genre and fosters an important conversation about representation and power dynamics. And here's the thing. The people these explorers were writing weren't just black canvas. They were living, breathing society. They are breathing societies with their own rich stories, cultures, and traditions. But colonial travel writing often reduces them to stereotypes, the noble savage, or usually the primitive. It was a way to justify the ideas that these lands and people were somehow untouched by civilization and in need of European intervention. I'll continue. The colonial lens surrounds the viewpoint shaped by colonial ideologies that historically depicted indigenous peoples as others, requiring exploration or civilizing efforts. Travel writing, influenced by this perspective, often showcases a Eurocentric bias, exercising uh, and objectifying non-Western cultures. Advertise's notion of Orientalism highlights how these narratives establish a divide between the colonizer and the colonized, reinforcing ideas of superiority and dominance.
A brief introduction to Edward Said. Edward Said was a Palestinian American intellectual, literary critic, and one of the most influential thinkers of the 20th century. He is most famously known for his groundbreaking work, Orientalism 1978, where he critiqued Western representations of the Orient, a term used to describe the Middle East and Asia as exotic, backward, and inferior.
Traces of this colonial perspective remain evident as authors may unintentionally uphold stereotypes or neglect critically examine the histories of the regions they explore. And contrarily, post-colonial writers confront these narratives by weaving in reference to imperial texts, thus criticizing and recontextualizing earlier representations. This approach fosters a more nuanced understanding of travel, recognizing both its historical injustices and current realities. Take Henry Morton Stanley, for example. He, he is famous for exploring the Congo, but his accounts were full of racial stereotypes, depicting Africans as backward or wild. That is a really huge problem in colonial writing because it is written from a position of power and people being written about they have no voice in the narrative. And that's my POV of the post-colonial authors come in, right? They change these kinds of writing. Uh, Ari, Aryca, how do contemporary writers and critics challenge this colonial narrative in travel writing?
Okay, so in post-colonial authors and critics have questioned how colonial writers describe the East. Edward Said, a key figure in this field, argued in his famous book that is Orientalism, that these portrayals were not just simple travel stories, but part of a system used to control and dominate. He also explained that the West created a specific image of the East as strange, dangerous, and uncivilized, which justify their control over it and reinforce their own power. And postcolonialism has also influenced modern travel writing by focusing on identity, cultural analysis, and globalization. Unlike colonial travel writing, postcolonial authors often explore their own identities and reflect on how colonialism has shaped the place they visit. They also look at how globalization connects different culture and affect their experiences. Modern travel writers emphasize blending cultures and navigating multiple identities, showing how local and global influences shape their journey. This idea of being a global soul highlights how today travelers actively engage in cultural exchange instead of just observing. And but how does this post-colonial critique play out in modern travel writing? So Suci, what are some ways contemporary travel writers are responding to colonial legacies in their work?
So here comes our modern day confusion. As you can see, we live in a world where anyone has a smartphone, or with a smartphone and a blog, anyone can be a travel writer. But that doesn't mean every story is told responsibly by these writers. So today's travel writers have to be aware of the legacy of colonialism writers, and they need to ask themselves hard questions about those representation about the land that they are going to write about in their travel writing. We can take a look at writers like Robert Macfarlane in The Old Ways, for example. So his work is all about connecting with the land and the people in a thoughtful way. He doesn't just walk, but he also listens, learns, and also reflects on how the land has been shaped by centuries of history, including colonialism era. And then let's compare that with some travel blogs that still romanticize these untouched lands, and they are really ignoring the legacies of colonialization, or maybe worse, they really into enforcing these stereotypes that were built centuries ago. So I want to ask some questions to Dewi about what if someone wants to be a responsible travel writer today? What advice would you want to give them, and how do they avoid these mistakes of colonial narratives while still telling an engaging travel stories?
Okay, great question, Suci. First off, I'd say don't just visit a place, understand it. Be humble in your approach and recognize the power dynamics at play. So you're telling someone else's story, so you do the work, do your research, learn about the local history, and think critically about what your story says and what it leaves out. And second, engage with local communities. Don't just observe them, don't reduce the cultures to their touristy aspects. If you want to write about a place, listen to the voices of people who live there, the local people. Travel writing today has the potential to challenge stereotypes, amplify local voices, and contribute to a more nuanced understanding of the world if done with care and respect. Alright, before we wrap up, let's go around the table for some final thoughts. Jingga, what do you think is the big takeaway
from today's discussion on colonialism and travel writing?
Okay. Yeah, as for me, it's about that travel writing has always been more than just adventure stories. Deep responsibility, writers need to think critically about the narrative they're creating.
Yes, absolutely. Post-colonial authors emphasize that every location possesses its unique history. The land, its inhabitants, and their cultures are not mere objects for us to uncover. We must interact with them as equals rather than viewing them as a mere subjects for our narrative.
Exactly. And I think what stuck with me is how important it is to center indigenous voices and challenge those old colonial perspectives. Travel writing isn't just about what we see, it's about amplifying the voices of the people who actually live in those places.
Yes, and as a travel writers, we have a duty to think critically and also fairly about the stories we're going to tell. And because our words have power to influence people about these travel writing stories, rather than giving them an unjust story about the places that we're going to write, we need to use our words for good by giving them the accurate explanation about the places, such as how they're native people, how they culture, and how the beauty of the places that we're going to write about. We need to give a really fair explanation and see it with really a different perspective. Okay, would you all agree that at the end of the day, travel writing and travel itself is really about connection, about going beyond the surface and telling stories that reflect the beauty and complexity of the places and people you encounter? Yes, I think I agree with that.
Uh, okay. Okay. Um, Absolutely, yeah. That exactly. Just so, uh, sorry, what?
Okay. We have an incredible journeys. We have incredible journeys this conversation has been. We started by unpacking the roots of travel writing during the colonial era, a time when explorers and writers were shaping not just how Europe viewed the world, but how the world viewed itself. Their words weren't just innocent observation, they were loaded with assumptions, power dynamics, and the seeds of imperialism. Then we changed the topics to discuss how post-colonial authors and thinkers have worked to challenge and rewrite those narratives. Writers like Edward said didn't just critique the old ways, they opened the door for more inclusive, more honest way of telling stories. They reminded us that behind every description of a land, culture, or people, there's a perspective, and that perspective carries the weight of story. And with that, we're officially wrapping up today's episode of Group 3 podcast. We hope this conversation has given you something to think about, whether it's reading the books you read, the trips you take, or even the stories you tell yourself about the world. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey. Goodbye. Eh,